Treasury Transformation Journey webinar. This topic surfaced after us hearing a lot of people talk about their transformation experience. And what people are saying is that in addition to their day jobs, corporate practitioners are being tasked increasingly with Treasury transformation projects. And while integration and transformation of your organization is very important, that transformation journey can be very daunting. So the objective of today's session is to get input from industry experts on options available to improve the ride to transformation and connectivity. Let me start off by introducing today's speakers. I will start out with Sean Kempert. Sean represents the corporate practitioner side of today's discussion. He's Director of Financial Systems at Fiserv. Sean has over 15 years of corporate treasury experience in various roles, such as Treasury Compliance and Administration, FX Trading, and Domestic and International Cash Management. Welcome, Sean. Next, we have Jeff DiOrio. Jeff is representing our industry expertise as Managing Director at PMC Treasury. Jeff functions in an operational treasury advisory role with a focus on technology and automation. Jeff has over 30 years of experience in treasury automation, design, selection, and implementation, treasury and liquidity optimization, and payment risk mitigation. Good morning, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff. So there's two Jeffs on this. This will be fun.
Yeah, and I'm Jeff Ferguson from Axle Tree Solutions. I've been in banking for a number of years, and in recent years spent a lot of time in connectivity and transformation topics, and decided to make it my full-time role here at Axle Tree. So why don't we get started with our first question? And I would ask Sean, what does treasury transformation mean to you? And Sean, before you start, I'll remind the audience that we do have a Q&A function on the bottom of your screen. Feel free to key in and ask questions along the way, and we'll take the time to entertain those questions for you. So Sean, what does treasury transformation mean to you?
All right. Thanks, Jeff. So treasury transformation to me, that means moving away from manual, decentralized processes being used to gather information that Treasury uses and execute Treasury activities. Anything from getting your bank statements in and executing your various payments.
Excellent. Jeff D, what would your input be?
Thanks, Jeff F. So I look at transformation as being more than automation. The automation complements, right, your effort to improve, and you need to think about this, your liquidity, your working capital, your operational objectives, how you are managing your treasury. The automation is there to complement what your objectives are, and you need to think about that. So when you think about it, the concept should be that you're trying to free people up from compiling data. We use the term scalability, leverage, right? Nobody that's listening to this webinar feels that they have enough resources in their treasury or their finance department, or really in their company. Everybody would like to have a couple of more hands-on keys kind of capability, and we don't have that. And you want to build the scalability into your operation, so as you grow, you're not just adding people because you're not efficient. And also, you've got the challenges of keeping people happy. And I think during COVID, one treasurer put it to me, we found that we had a lot of cracks in our processing and our operations that were papered over by the fact that we were all together in the office. And it became much clearer to us. None of these were disastrous. They weren't bad. They were just cracks. And they became clear to us, and we were able to focus on transforming our treasury operations, mostly with automation and workflow to achieve better efficiency and scalability.
Well said, Jeff. Thank you for that. I guess from my perspective, treasury transformation is a matter of recognizing where you are as an organization, becoming aware of what the possibilities are, knowing what's at stake if you don't transform, and then understanding where you ultimately want to be and then how to get there. I think that's a really good way to understand how you're going to entertain the whole concept of transformation. Let's go to our next question. What are you trying to achieve through automation? So quick comment for me real quickly. You know, statistically in response to COVID, 81% of corporate treasurers said that they're leveraging some form of innovative solutions to automate processes, reduce costs, and reduce their risk exposure. And just yesterday, AFP released its 2022 payments cost benchmarking survey. And the takeaway I got from there was that 73% of organizations are moving away and transitioning from B2B payments via check to electronic payments. That says heavy transformation. Sean, what are you trying to achieve through your automation projects?
Yeah, it's to remove the friction in getting your treasury data and using it. And, you know, eliminating these manual processes, decentralized processes, allows for the treasury group to do more value-added activities, just as Jeff D was explaining here previously. So to me, that's the big, you know, the big focus here that we're trying to achieve through the connectivity and automation process here at FISO.
And Jeff Diorio, what would you say for this question? What would your response be?
I think this is, you know, a big area, you know, and depending on who you are, you're at a different level with this. So, you know, say you have no treasury management system, or you have, or on the other hand, you might be like Sean, they're implementing SAP globally. I mean, that's a massive task.
Yeah.
That, you know, I tend to see very evolved and larger organizations be able to do, right? But some of you may be like, well, I can't do that. We don't have SAP, we're PeopleSoft, or we're you know, NetSuite or some other system. And some of you have TMSs, and some of you have, you know, banks you log into and Excel. So we're all on different, you know, ends of the spectrum, but that doesn't mean that you can't put a program in place to sort of move you up the level of automation that's appropriate for where your organization is. And I think everybody can benefit from it. You need to be looking at areas where people are literally taking information from one system and putting it in another. And this is, honestly, this is how we start a lot of our engagements. We say, okay, let's look at what your daily operations are like. And they're like, yeah, we have this beautiful cash position worksheet we prepare. And when we watch how all the steps people go through to create that, or the forecast, or process payments, and you say, well, yeah, this is, but you're doing 10 steps, and you're why? And so there's all of these are opportunities to take people out of moving data from one system to another, or compiling data, or having to dramatically enrich data, because there's no value add there. I mean, you know, the finance people are highly educated, they're expensive, and wasting them moving data from point A to point B is not what you're supposed to be doing. So we just finished a study, much better than the one Jeff F mentioned a few minutes ago. And our study was of treasuries that get very high utilization from their technologies. And, you know, so I'm going to give you some examples to think about. And we categorized their 2022 initiatives into 3 areas. One was workflow automation, you know, getting data from the banks more efficiently, you know, leveraging Swift, you moving to XML, all of these ways that organizations better straight through processing for foreign exchange, or for investments, putting a payment workflow in. Payment workflow very, very big this year. And I think that's a long tail from what we just went through, right? Everybody was like, well, wait, we're not doing wet signatures on paper anymore. We're going to put a real system in. And again, it doesn't matter how advanced your organization is, or how, you know, long-lived your treasury department is. everybody can find improvements in these areas. So workflow automation was one of the three big areas. The other one, of course, every single year was forecasting, improving my forecasting somehow. And I think that's, as one treasurer said, until magic wands or predicting the future become a reality, right? This is an exercise in having the best educated guess you possibly can. And so I think it makes sense that every year you revisit forecasting to say, is there something we can do differently? And there's all kinds of cool, exciting things people are talking about there, like artificial intelligence and machine learning, which do have a place, but the reality is people are still spending a heck of a lot of time extracting data from systems, manipulating it, and these hellacious Excel spreadsheets, and voila, here's my forecast. And if you look at how much time is being spent to do that, I think there's a whole lot of ways in there to improve your efficiency. And then the third area is dashboarding. And I think dashboarding is really exciting now, because the ability to get data, tools like Axle Trees tools are very, very advanced in getting the data. And then there are tools for manipulating the data, making it standard so that you're not doing the crazy Excel thing with 10 spreadsheets with 15 tabs in them, right? If you think about why you're doing that, and many people do have to do that, but if you think about why you're doing that, it's because the data isn't already prepared. And so there's all these wonderful tools for getting the data and preparing the data. And finally, there's the display of the dashboard. People love this idea this year, because they're starting to get to the point where they go, hey, why should I be emailing reports around? Let people come in self-service. We'll put together a finance dashboard, and frankly, it elevates your department by doing that. Well, there's a lot of little components below that. How do you get the data? How do you manipulate the data? How do you render the data? And you're like, well, we can't afford this. Yes, you can. As a matter of fact, the largest, best tool for this right now that everybody, if they're not using a more advanced one, they're using Power BI, which is a Microsoft app. And if you've got Excel and Word and PowerPoint, it's a very small incremental cost, and normal people can make it work. And you've got a beautiful dashboard. So now that's the final piece. You have to get the data. You have to kind of manipulate, standardize, normalize the data, enrich the data. And then you've got this wonderful tool that can just render it. And so those are the three areas I see treasuries in 22 focusing on with their automation.
Jeff, thank you for that. One thing I heard that you mentioned there that was really interesting to me is that treasury transformation isn't a one and done destination. It's more of a fluid paradigm. Would you agree?
Oh, yes. Yes, I could do this study every single year. I don't like doing the same study every single year. It gets a little boring for me and everybody that I'm asking the question of. But it is a fluid thing, just like I was mentioning with forecasting. When you automate or when you do any of these things, you should always, first off, budget for it, and always think about tuning it up. It's like when you own a vehicle, right? You don't just buy a car and drive it for 20,000, 30,000 miles and just put gas in it and hope that everything's going to work out okay, because that engine's going to seize on you or something else will go wrong. So every year you do tend to change the oil and get a tune up every now and then. The time span of that is moving out, but think about your automation like that. Have a week or two period twice a year where you review, are we sliding backwards, or are there more areas that we can get better value from? And I'll give you an example. So I do kind of that study in a different form every year or so when I talk to treasurers about what's on their to-do list. And every year for the last couple of years, people have been saying, well, I got to put a bank fee system in, and I got to do a bank account management solution. And bank account management, tracking all of my accounts and knowing who has rights to do what entitlements and all that stuff, very important. And it's funny because they do the survey again and they say, yeah, I'm going to do that this year. And I say, didn't you say you were going to do that last year? And they laugh and they say, yeah, we were, but something came up and it slid. But if they had planned and just said, we're gonna have, I don't know, twice a year, a couple of weeks where we look at where people are taking data from one system, putting it in another, however you want to think about inefficiencies. And we're going to tune our SAP or our TMS, or we're just going to tune the process for requesting payments. We would, we got to stop getting emails saying, please make this payment, because that's dangerous. You need to have, something that makes it better. And since the efficiency and the controls, because controls are about avoiding attacks in a way, or mistakes, the mistakes are always there, but some of the attacks are getting more and more robust. So thinking about ways to put those controls in place is important. And I think it's a never-ending process. It's continual improvement. You don't want to spend all your time on it. That's why I said maybe pick 2 weeks, 2 different times a year to focus on.
Very well said. Thanks for that, Jeff. This is a good time for us to do a poll to get a sense of where everybody's at in terms of their connectivity. So we'll put that poll up on the screen and ask everyone to participate. We'll have a couple words of comments on the results. So please participate in the poll by selecting one answer to the question. If you can't decide on which one to pick on the one that's heaviest if you were to weigh them out. We'll give that just a few more seconds. All right, let's take a look at our results. So bank portals are still pretty heavy, and so is host to host. Interesting. You've got a few APIs, so that's encouraging to see. Sean, what would you say on these comments? How does this compare to your operation?
Yeah, I mean, it totally lines up with what I was expecting and what we've been doing here at Fiserv up until recently. I mean, the bank portals, those are the easiest things to get set up on and everything, but they're the most manual process. And then again, host to host, a lot of companies investing in Swift. There is significant investment there to get set up in Swift and have a provider to host the infrastructure that probably scares some companies away. So I'm not surprised seeing this because again, where we were and where we're moving away from, it's what we see here with the bank portals and the host to host connectivity.
Good to know. Jeff, what do you think?
I've got a lot to say about this one. So I go back to when we had modems and dialing up banks and stuff like that.
Me too.
And then you all went host to host, right? And they work, right? It's great. You're getting automation in place, and you're freeing your people up. And by the time you get to the office, voila, you know what your global liquidity position is, which I think is probably one of the very, very first building blocks that everybody should automate is what's my global liquidity. And to see that, well, first off, say something goes wrong, you always need to be able to log into that bank portal just in case.
Right.
Not shocked to see that a number of participants say they're still doing that. Frankly, you could be fully automated using Swift and everything's lovely, but you still need to log into the bank for verification or some other things. And I think that's appropriate. The host to host, it works. It's out there. It works. If you've put it in place, why are you going to rip it out and replace it with something else? If it ain't broke, why fix it, kind of thing. Swift, on the other hand, and I was involved with Swift, back in 2010 when they started opening Swift up to corporates because, prior to that, only banks got to use it.
Right.
And people were just thrilled to death with it because it was a single connection and it was a single format. And it just solved, so many problems. And for years, we were helping people onboard to Swift and stuff like that. Swift didn't have a very good interface for corporates to get onto it, but it's great idea. People still really, really like it. And that is the results of our recent studies, people like it. To be a little excitable here and throw maybe a couple of ideas out there. Part of the study was that APIs, while they're wonderful, you're supposed to get richer, faster, better data. Really, it was only a handful of banks, and where we saw APIs being used to high value was when you're building these dashboards and you're saying, well, can I get data from my ERP?
Exactly.
Can I get data from my TMS? And if my bank will support APIs, great. But what I'm hearing is quite a few of the banks will give you a BAI file or an MT940 or an XML file, a CAMT file over the API. Well, how is that any better? It's a delivery mechanism. How is that any better, or worse than SFTP or Swift?
Right.
So, and I did hear, one of the questions I asked was, what areas do you think still are demanding better automation? Like it's just not there for you yet. You wish somebody would come up with something better. And one of the big complaints was this move to APIs is almost dragging us backwards, because now we're going to have individual connections with everything that we have to maintain, right? Me, the corporate treasurer, are going to have to maintain multiple connections with different formats now. And so in a way, we're moving backwards. Swift was single connection, single format. And yeah, you might have done some stuff to get there, but it was one format. It was one, conversion tool that got you to that format. And now you're kind of moving backwards. So obviously I'm a little impassioned about this because I do see this as an area where you see 50% of the people, 45% of the respondents said they're still connecting with banks directly, which I'm guessing in some of those cases is people are logging in and downloading their prior day files so they can figure out their global liquidity. And that's the first area I would look at to automate.
Interesting results. Great comments from you, gentlemen. Let's move to our next question. And we'll start here. Sean, I'm going to start with you on this because you are right in the heart of a huge transformation. So what are the challenges you've been experiencing during your transformation journey?
Yeah, so here at Fiserv, well over years ago, we've taken on this journey of consolidating our ERP systems. We have multiple ERPs globally. And also, we didn't have true treasury functionality within the ERP. So as part of this effort, we're consolidating our ERPs and building out treasury functionality in SAP S/4HANA. And we're in wave one of this project. It just went live back in April, where we brought on 35 banks. That includes getting bank feeds for around 600 bank accounts, managing 20 different payment file formats from 7 banks. And this covers everything now. Treasury doing payments in the SAP environment, AP, AR, and things like that. So we're into wave one of this project. Wave two, we're getting ready to kick off, and that's the rest of international. And we have another 100 banks or so, and another 1,000 bank accounts, and a dozen or so different payment files that we're going to have to bring on board and connect to our SAP S/4HANA environment. Prior to going live, and again, it kind of goes back to the question we just had, the polling question. We have multiple means of connectivity here. We have host to host, we have Swift, and then of course, bank portals to do everything from getting bank statements to doing treasury payments, doing AP payments, and things like that. And then again, across that, there's multiple file formats that were being used in that. So when we stepped back and we looked at this and the amount of work that needed to be done to get this up and running for our wave one go live here, we went down the path of leveraging a treasury aggregator solution. We looked at multiple vendors. Axletree ended up being our partner here, helping us out with this. And what this has done for us is it's simplified our connectivity. So Fiserv has one point of contact with Axletree, and then Axletree is our point of contact with all our bank partners. And we're pushing where possible to leverage SWIFT because we do have a SWIFT corporate BIC. And then also, you know, we have a lot of banks. There's some smaller banks that don't offer SWIFT for corporate. So Axletree is providing that host-to-host connectivity as well. But it's taken a lot of the resources that we would have had to do this ourselves, a lot of the technical resources. It's freed them up to work on the more end user experience of what we're building here in SAP with SAP S/4HANA. Also, you know, there's the standardization of file formats. We're finding, yeah, you know, a bank says I can do an XML payment, but you find out there's various flavors of that standard format. And instead of Fiserv having to build each of those formats out for the bank partners specifically, we've been able to leverage them to help us transform the payment file format. So we can send one format out of our system and they'll transform it to the specific bank format. Again, that cuts down on a lot of the work that we have to do on our side and the dedicated, you know, the dedicated resources that would need to do that. Also, I feel like this makes us more agile too. We're constantly adding bank relationships, you know, mergers and acquisitions. We're moving business around, and I'm sure there's a lot of participants here that see that as well. But that gives us a level of agility here that we can partner with somebody like Axletree to actually do a lot of that work for us. We already have the connection to them. They can go out and then help us get the connection to the new bank partner up and running.
Very well said. Jeff D, what are you seeing from your experience?
My heart goes out to Sean. You guys can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm working from our New York office today, so we do the thing. We're in the office a few days and a few days not. And invariably, when I'm doing one of these webinars, the fire trucks decide to come by. So that just happened. But yeah, I know Fiserv pretty well. I actually worked there a long time ago. Sean might have been in elementary school back then. But, and what he said about the connectivity and the challenges there are true, and that's why, you know, people look at aggregators that take care of some of these things, and it has to be thought of. Even if, you know, you look at Sean, you go, okay, well, it's just SAP, and it's just, you know, well, it's not just a couple of banks, it's a hell of a lot of banks. And you could say, well, there's an EDI format or there's a SWIFT format, but as he pointed out, it's sort of like, what tribe of SWIFT are you? You know, B of A wants it this way and JP Morgan wants. So there's those challenges. Yeah. If I boil it up to a higher level though, and think about it a little differently, what challenges have I seen people experience during their journey? And I'm going to talk about this differently than Sean did. So in a lot of cases, you decide on a roadmap and you decide you're going to do something. Like they decided to put SAP in, and that's a huge multi-year project. What happens during the project is you start losing momentum for a variety of reasons. And so if you're going to embark on one of these journeys to do treasury transformation, you need to think about where these pitfalls are. And I see organizations are usually really, really good at saying, this is what we need to do. Here's the roadmap, and we know what we want to implement. And where you fall down, where the challenges come in, is not enough budget, not considering the resourcing, and the resourcing impact. And I'll spend a little bit of time on that. And senior management buy-in. Those three things, right? Budget, resourcing, and senior management buy-in. Because this is where I've seen projects going along, and then you start getting to the end period where you're running out of money, your team are sick and disgusted of working on this project. And you need to worry about that because people do get burned out. And then upper management are like, well, we told you to get it done. And what's the definition of getting it done? Well, as you get closer to the end and it's not going well, that definition shrinks as small as you can possibly make it. And we talk about throwing stuff off the train as you're going along, just so you can get there. And that's why people don't get the high value in a lot of cases from these decisions and these investments they've made. And it's terrible because I get very upset about it, but I do this for a living, right? Because you've made this investment, you spent this money, but more than spending that money, you spent your human capital to build this thing. And when you get to the end of it, because you haven't budgeted enough and you haven't considered the fact that, you know, you and everybody else in your team have a day job and they're doing this implementation, is going to impact them. And then if it isn't tightly aligned with what upper management really want, it's like doomed to failure. And one of the other issues I see when you talk about people is resistance. And it may be not intentional. It could be intentional. You could have somebody who just, I had one project where somebody wanted one TMS and they decided on another. And that one person, it was almost like they went out of their way to mess the project up. It got done successfully, but that's a silly example. But there may be an unintentional bias against change, right? I know how to do this, or it's fine. I know I'm going to do this job for another year and move on to another job. I really don't want to have to do it differently, put in the effort to change and all that. And so you need to think about that as you're doing these projects. And in some cases, like, you know, I have a couple of clients that have used Axletree. And what's wonderful about it is, you know, Axletree does a lot of the heavy lifting. So you don't run into some of these issues. Once they decide on the money and stuff like that, great. But that's only part of many of these projects. And so your transformation journey is a long one. So just to recap, you need to make sure you've got enough budget. You need to think about the resourcing. And one of the ways to do that is think about KPIs and then getting alignment with management. Now, in Sean's case, they had way too many ERPs and way too many a bunch of other things. And they really did make an excellent decision to try and go to one platform. And when they get there, the ability to do finance, you know, modeling and visualization is going to be unbelievable because they don't have to glue data together from 15 different places. It's going to be awesome. But to get there is I mean, if anybody else has heard about an SAP project, it is a long, expensive project. The whole organization has to be behind it. So that's where you get, you know, alignment with upper management, making sure that upper management are giving people pats on the back for, you know, getting the project done the right way, and they support what's being done and they recognize the individuals that are sacrificing for it. Making sure you've got that upper management buy-in for anything. Say you're putting in a better version of a forecast. If you don't have upper management buy-in, it's like swimming against the tide. It's just gonna be a very painful experience. So I know I went on for a while there, Jeff. After you.
No, actually, it's really good. That made me think of another question. So from our experience at Axletree, when we work with corporates, one of the things that comes up often is this phrase: we don't know what we don't know. So a practitioner gets an email or some kind of communication that says we are implementing a new ERP or we're implementing a new Treasury workstation. And I get the impression that they don't know everything that's encompassed in it. And maybe they have a hard time defining what resources they're going to need in order to pull this off. I'd be curious to hear, Sean, did that happen at your end? And Jeff, what you might say about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was a little overwhelming when you looked at the landscape here just for our wave one go live, 35 banks and, you know, 600 bank accounts and the multiple payment methods that, you know, formats. And, you know, we had to think here, okay, we're going live in a year. You know, we just got done planning. We're going live in a year. We're doing this and that. How do we connect to our banks to make this all work? And, you know, I joined the financial systems team from corporate treasury at Fiserv within. I moved across to this role just because I saw the opportunity here to do this better, because I was looking at the current landscape of all the portals, all the, you know, some Swift here, host to host there, that, hey, we need to find a partner that can help us solve this problem. And that's where we went down the Treasury aggregator path. And I had to get buy-in because it was a significant additional spend to the SAP project itself, and had to do a lot of work to justify what this would do to us to help us go live, and what it's going to save us on the resource side. So it was daunting at first, but as we chipped away at it, we were able to come up with a very good story with a solution here that
Smart.
continue to move the overall project forward and make it successful.
Nice. Well done. Jeff?
What Sean alluded to, so as you're doing these projects, you're going to encounter things that people hadn't considered. And, when he was talking about the bank connectivity, the powers, the senior people on the project side will say, oh, well, we're just going to connect SAP with banks. And they don't think about the ramifications of that. And quite frankly, when you peel the top off of that thing, you figure out that it's a heck of a lot more work, and certain parts of it hadn't been thought about. So I like the fact that you said that. We don't know what we don't know. And in a lot of cases, I do briefings all the time where people say to me, what do I need to think about that? I'm going to be doing this. What do I need to think about that I haven't considered? And usually in the course of any conversation I have when they've asked that question, 2 or 3 things come up that they hadn't thought about. So you kind of need to be nimble, or assume that you're going to need to be nimble in your project, because things are going to happen. Even if you think you have an excellent grasp on exactly how everything's going to work, something's going to happen during the project that didn't function the way you thought it would. I remember a project a while ago where, we were going to get an extract from this investment system that was going to give us all the payments that needed to come out of it. And they were already providing an extract. And there was just, I can't remember exactly what it was about the new extract or the revised process for getting the data from point A to point B, but it became a 3-month stumbling problem in the project. And nobody anticipated that, because they already had a pre-existing interface. They didn't realize that touching that thing was going to cause 3 months of status calls saying, when the heck is this going to get done? And it became a steering committee, upper management thing that got escalated to C-level people to say, well, this is one of the problems with the project. This one system out of 26 is being problematic. So you need to expect the unexpected. Is a stupid thing to say, I think, but it is something you need to be nimble, is what I'm saying. You have to be prepared to be nimble, identify the problems as early as possible, and make sure you have a team that's dynamic enough to think their way through how to solve this problem.
And Jeff, just to interject here, kind of the mantra that I've gone through, because in my previous roles prior to Fiserv First Data, I've worked on other technology projects around implementing high frequency FX trading systems and whatnot. And I always tell people, hope for the best and plan for the worst. And, part of my participation, what we're doing here at Fiserv, I'm always thinking, all right, we got a plan to do this. This is how we're going to connect. All right, in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking, what if this doesn't work? What's the next solution here that's either going to keep us running, or what is another permanent solution? So I just wanted to add to that, as you were calling out that, these projects like this, they're big, and you don't know what you don't know. But I always say, you hope for the worst and you plan. You hope for the best and plan for the worst.
Yeah. A former client of mine, when I was in banking, put it this way. He said, it's like having another full-time job. It pretty much summed it up for me, how daunting it can be when you don't have the right resources in place. Let's take a minute and look at our next polling question. Treasury transformation polling question 2. Take a look at what's keeping you from keeping you from keeping your automation and connectivity objectives on time? Take a quick look, give us a quick answer, and we'll take a look at the results. All right, let's see what our results look like. Interesting. Lack of resources, not surprising, 58%. Budget approval. Intriguing. Sean, does this line up with your experience?
Yeah, I almost feel, and I've seen it, Treasury never gets the love. and resources and budgeting. And I've seen this through my career that, you know, we do such a critical role, but it's really, a lot of it's usually behind the scenes. And it kind of gets a backseat to, you know, these other projects. You know, you'll get people say, what revenue is this project going to generate for me, and things like that. So the resources dedicated to Treasury, I see that definitely here in the polling results and from my experience. And then, you know, also the budget approval, and then again, staff to manage the project. Hey, Treasury has a day job here. They got to focus on that. Where's the time to work on projects and move things forward? So I'm not surprised here at seeing what the results we have here from this polling question.
Jeff, what are your views on these results?
You know, Sean helped me think through this a bit, because I always hear, oh, IT is problematic, and, you know, people like to always point to the other group and say it's their problem. But you know, it is, nobody's got enough staff or budget to do what they want to accomplish. And as Sean pointed out, Treasury tend to get, look, I mean, it is more important. The most important thing, right, is that there's enough money in the accounts, and then that payroll clears, right? Because if payroll doesn't clear, it's lights out, stop working. So, right, that's AP. That's not per se Treasury. Treasury's making sure the money's there, but, you know, that process has to run. And this is one of the reasons that SaaS solutions and cloud solutions have become all the rage. We'll do a TMS selection project, and somebody will say, or a forecasting implementation, somebody will say, well, IT have to get involved. They say, well, IT have to approve the vendor, but there's very little, when you go with the SaaS solution, there's only a few connection points that IT need to worry about. So the need for IT to be, you know, super involved have dropped away. And that's one of the reasons, the fact that, you know, lack of available resources is one of the reasons people love SaaS and outsourced and cloud solutions. And you know, one of them, there's many other reasons to love it, like never having to do an upgrade again is heaven, right? Budget approval, yeah, I feel so bad for so many people. Last year, I got to work with a hospital system that finally got approval to do a TMS, and the powers that be kept saying, no, we're not giving you money to do this. But then when all of a sudden during COVID, they had to go from forecasting once a month to forecasting multiple times a day, voila, they got the money finally for something, because everybody finally realized how important it was. So yeah, getting in the queue for your money is a challenge. And I mentioned budget earlier. As much as possible, try and accurately estimate what you're going to need, because, you know, to get some of these deals, the vendors try and make it sound like it's not going to hurt that much. But if you're going to do this, you try and be as reasonable as possible. One of the things I've had people come to me and say is, I only get to go back and ask for money one more time. So let's make sure that this budget's accurate now, right? I don't want to have to, it's not going to be drip, 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 because somebody's going to get it, and it's not going to be me, it's going to be you, right? So, so there's that. And then the staff, and I mentioned it earlier, and Jeff, you mentioned it, and Sean, you know, I think it fits with what you guys are going through. There's only so many hours in a day, and your team still have to run Treasury and still have to do all the things, make sure there's enough money in the accounts, right? All those things have to happen. and you're doing this project. And so, you know, I'm not saying rent somebody, but you need to consider that.
Good point. Let's move to the next question. I do have a couple questions. Let's see what I'm on here. But before we go to this, Sean, you mentioned using an aggregator. So what would you see as the biggest advantage of using an aggregator for all connectivity? And what should a corporate look for when choosing one? That's a question that somebody keyed in.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we went down the path again, as I mentioned earlier. It helps free up resources. We're taking our technical resources out of having to manage each individual connection, where the aggregator is able to do that. And then also the value added activities of you know, file transformation and things like that. And again, it makes you as a company agile, that if you need to switch banks, you have somebody there that's going to help you move quicker on that. And you don't have to worry about this polling questions we just talked about, staffing, IT resources,
Right.
and things like that. So that's the important thing. And, you know, again, we went through a process. We looked at multiple solutions here for an aggregator. And, you know, you gotta vet them through really good. You know, can they support Swift? Can they also support host to host? What other value added activities can they give you? Can they do these file transformations? What tools are they going to give you to monitor this file traffic? You know, do you have a dashboard here that you're going to be able to see your file traffic? Because if you don't, and you sent a file out of your ERP or your TMS and it didn't get to the bank, you're on this wild goose chase. And if you don't have the right monitoring tools and dashboards, then it's going to take a lot more time to figure out what's happening, what's broken down, and fixing the issue. So those were some of the key things that we looked at across the board. And just, you know, thinking ahead to the flexibility to be able to grow with you as well. Hey, you know, I got 10 banks now that I need to connect to, but in a year or two from now, I might have another 20 or 30. Can the aggregator handle that? Can they give the support that be talking to different banks? There might be different ways that the banks want to connect. Not all of them do Swift. You know, some do host to host. Some might even push APIs. Can the aggregator support, you know, supporting an API connection as well? So those are, when we went through the process here at Fiserv, those were the types of questions that we were asking as we were vetting through the aggregators that we were looking at.
Good one. Another question here, and this would be more for Jeff. Jeff, you're used to dealing with various size companies. So Fiserv's very large, lots of banks, lots of accounts. Is there value in a smaller size company using an aggregator like Fiserv does?
To a degree, if you've got one bank, you know, you could maybe arrange with them how you're going to do it. But it's not just communicating the data between you and the bank, right, back and forth. I mentioned earlier, dashboarding is hot, right?
Yeah.
For a very, very good reason. Forecasting, very, very good reasons for doing these things, right? You can't make any financial decisions if you don't have some concept of when you're going to need the money. So forecasting is always a big issue. And so, you know, deciding how you're going to communicate the data, deal with the different formats as Sean was talking about, but also be able to bring data back in and create a canonical format, you know, get it somehow enriched and standardized so that it can fit into your ERP and it can fit into your other solutions. That's sort of an extra value add that people don't think about. And when I go back to the whinge that I heard about on my study, where people said, I don't want to deal with different connections and different formats and all this stuff. I just take this problem off my hands.
Right.
And so I think there will always be a place for that. When I think about lessons learned, though, and I think about the different, types of organizations, types of treasuries, and levels of experience you have, because Fiserv's a big company, right? And and they do some really, really cool things. They have great software too. I know because I work there. But when you're thinking about what lessons have you learned, I like to break it apart into two parts. There's technology projects, and there's making strategic change or operational change within your organization, your treasury department. For the technology projects, I've already mentioned this, have clear objectives and a plan on how you're going to meet them. And I've seen way too many projects where they go, well, we're going to teach you how it works, and then we're going to decide how to implement it. And they go, no, stop. They're putting this technology in for a reason. They want to accomplish this with it. These are the reports and the data feeds they need to get out of this thing. You need to understand that up front so you don't paint yourself in a corner and have to redo something. So there's that. And then the one point I want to make to everybody is any project, and Sean is probably going to just jump up and say hallelujah when I say this, aggressive project management. And I used to teach my team that project management is a contact sport. You cannot passively project manage something. You cannot be a project administrator. You have to manage it. You have to aggressively manage these projects, anticipating problems. And this goes into the whole, prepare for the worst, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. Aggressive project management is something you need to think about. A lot of people don't. They're like, well, the vendor's going to take care of it for me. Well, they can't really motivate your team. And,
True.
if upper management need to
That's
be
fair.
brought in to motivate somebody else, the vendor can't do that. You need to be part of that equation. So that's a good thought to leave you with there. I'm watching the clock. So, and I've said a bunch of this already, so I don't need to belabor it.
Sean, what lessons have you learned through this transformation project?
Yeah, I mean, diving down a little bit more in the weeds, and we've talked about this throughout the webinar here, and Jeff's mentioned it, I mentioned it, that, we've been trying to standardize things and use standard versions as much as possible, be it XML payment files, Swift payments, connectivity, things like that, that there's different flavors of it that has, in my experience here with this project, has thrown a curveball. It's thrown a curveball coming and going through the aggregator, and then how SAP can handle it, and had to make us think, outside the box in some situations where, hey, can we partner here, with Axletree, our aggregator provider, to help us do transformations and things like that. So, kind of going into it, I learned a lot through this, that, oh yeah, this bank has XML, this will be easy. We'll create one format of it in SAP and poof, send it right through the system and be fine. And they come back and say, no, you need to have this tag here, that tag there. So
Right.
It's been very interesting to see that, and just keep in mind that, hey, yeah, we use standard formats if the bank says that. There's probably a caveat to it, and that's been one of the major challenges here that I and the team here have had to deal with.
Well, Sean, one last thing then as we wrap this up, I want to leave just a minute or two for some questions if we have time. What would be the one thing that you would recommend to our audience today that they take away from today's session?
Yeah, and thinking of it from a technical standpoint with Treasury automation, and if there's participants here that are, going down the path of either a TMS or an ERP implementation, think about, sourcing some of this activity like we've done here at Fiserv through the aggregator process, and getting expertise to help you with that, to connect to your bank. So you're not spending time on that part of it where your limited resources can focus on more of the value added activity of building out functionality or dashboards, or being able to use what you're putting in place with a TMS or an ERP.
Well said. Jeff, your parting thoughts?
We've sort of been covering a bunch of really good ideas as we go along, so I'll kind of approach it from a different direction. What I think is important, and I think this summarizes a lot of what we've talked about, is, if you're going to go through a transformation project, develop a strategic plan and a roadmap that aligns with organizational key priorities. This way you can keep saying, this is what our organization's trying to achieve, and our project is moving us along the path to achieving that. And so everybody needs to get on board and support this decision. And this way, when you're trying to execute the various components of it, people understand the big picture, and then and you can keep reinforcing that, but making sure that upper management also reinforce that is really good. I recall a project where somebody was putting a dashboard in to show their working capital mix, and people were swearing up and down and sideways that they weren't paying too early. And that, of course, the corporate initiative was, let's be as efficient with our money as possible, right? We can't be silly with the money that we do have. And they kept pointing back to that. It wasn't stated like that, but that's what it generally was. And they wound up putting this dashboard in place that proved that, surprise, a whole bunch of really big invoices were getting paid early. And that just, drove everybody crazy when they saw it. But the data proved it out, and then they could adjust for it. Moving your DPO DSO mix a couple of days is enormous for many, many companies. So, that's, with faster payments and everything, you can hold on to that money as long as you possibly can, because you can do same day payments. So why would you be, issuing something a week or 10 days early when you don't need to? And so that's an example of how, in that project, they kept saying, we're going to be much, much better at working capital if we do this project. It supports this corporate initiative. And yeah, it was a couple of different technology pieces that had to get glued together to create it, but that's an example of how you would do it.
Excellent. Thank you, gentlemen, for that. My one takeaway would be that as a corporate practitioner, you do have options available to you. There are companies like Axle Tree Solutions, a software as a service provider that specializes in transformational connectivity projects. So you're not in this alone. You can get some help when you're trying to be successful. So we have a little bit of time for some questions. If you have something, please drop it in the Q&A button at the top of your screen. And while we're waiting for those to come in, there will be a survey at the conclusion of this. So I would really recommend everybody just take a couple of seconds to answer 5 quick questions in this format to help us understand how we can better serve you for future survey or future webinars. And while I'm waiting for the last questions to come in, I want to thank Jeff Diorio. Thank you very much, sir, for your help today. Sean Kempford, thank you for partnering with us. I appreciate all the great work that we've done together for this webinar. You've been a great help. And I want to thank all of our participants today, Laura. It's been just great having everybody on here and participating. We appreciate the questions that did come in. So if you have a minute, please take a second and take a look at the survey that's coming on your screen and answer those questions for us. We'll conclude the session in just a few moments, so please complete that survey. Thank you, gentlemen, for your participation today, and thank you to our participants. Have a wonderful day.